TCI is brought to you by Spendthrift Farm Stallion Arch, winner of the Grade 1 Arkansas Derby and a top 3 freshman sire in 2015.
Welcome back to TCI, your inside track to the Triple Crown. Alongside Joel Cunningham, I'm John Siegel. Well, Joel, we have to talk about the last of the Derby, the 100-point Derby races. Of course, I'm talking about the Arkansas Derby. But first, let's recap last weekend's races. And let's start off with the Wood Memorial. You know, in this race, we thought Outwork had a big chance in there, but you kind of thought a closer might come running late. The track was a mess. It was really sloppy. What did you think of his performance?
Well, obviously, it was a sealed track, another sloppy track, John. We're sort of seeing this theme where the rain is showing up in these final preps, and we're seeing odd things happening. I think speed was holding at Aqueduct that day, so that helped Outwork. I did think he was the best speed, outdrawn outside of Matt King Cole in that race. He put Matt King Cole away, proved to be best. You know, every quarter was a little slower than the one before, I believe, in this race. And I think he was the best horse in the race. However, like we talked about, with that speed, contentious speed in there, it's set up for a closer in my view. Now, I thought Flexibility may be that horse. However, he was far too fresh. He was up on right behind the pace, and he faltered. Shaggoff, again, disappointed. A lot of people were concerned about his quality. He disappointed here. Chad Brown chalked it up to him not getting over the track that well. But look at the horse on the rail, John, at 81-1, Trojan Nation. I mean, here's a horse that was 0 for 5 in maiden company, hadn't even run second in California against maidens, ships to the East Coast, obviously probably loved his closing style getting away from California, but still, he'd been running against maidens, and he rallies up the rail and comes ahead within winning the Grade 1 Wood Memorial, breaking his maiden. Now Trojan Nation's in the Derby field. So when you look at the speed figures here, and you look at the fact that a maiden almost won the race, really makes you wonder about the quality of the Wood Memorial going forward.
All right, well, let's look to see what, Outwork obviously won. He's got the points to get in the Derby, but did he do enough to get onto the TCI top 10?
He did. I mean, we talked about he's always kind of teetered right on the outside. He's a talent we've always loved, John. And I look at Outwork. To me, he belongs in the top 10. He's a Grade 1 winner. He's an exciting colt, big statured colt, should handle a classic distance. So he belongs in the top 10. I love his quality. My concern with him is, here's the kind of colt that's sort of had his trips. He's lightly experienced. He sort of had his way in the front end of the Tampa Bay Derby. Showed his quality that day, went second to Destin. I thought he had a good outside clear trip here. Will he get that sort of favorable trip in the Derby in just his 5th lifetime start when you look at Outwork? So big question marks, because I look at some of these speed. We're going to talk about Danzig Candy. We're going to talk about Nyquist and horses like that. It looks like those horses are confirmed for the Derby now. A lot of speed lining up. So Outwork coming back in a race like the Derby, I don't necessarily like his potential in a race like that, but he's a nice colt with a big feature.
Well, another horse I just saw there on the TCI top 10 is Exaggerator. And Joel, he looked great in the Santa Anita Derby. I mean, he's going up against your number 1 in there. Yeah. I thought it was a very impressive performance. But again, a wet track, this time in California.
Isn't that crazy? I mean, you never see a wet track at Santa Anita. Very rare do you see one out there. Bob Baffert talked about how sticky and cuppy it can get when it rains there, because it just never rains. That dirt track never has to face that sort of condition. And you saw Danzig Candy. You see him here. He's faded to 4th.
Yeah.
I mean, he's out of gas. Mike Smith gunned him from the gate, and I said, well, this is either going to be a front wire-to-wire victory. He knows what he's doing over this track, or it could be disastrous. Turned out to be disastrous for him. You saw a big slingshot move from Exaggerator here. He absolutely relished it, John. I mean, here's a horse that loves the sloppy track. He's got that curling smart strikes top side, really has a big wet track number, and he obviously loved it way more than his competition. And you saw a monster victory there. He got a 103 Byron, a legit speed figure for that race. So Exaggerator, a horse that has some back class. We know Mile and Ace, no problem for him. Question for him will be, can he put 2 races together back to back?
Yeah.
Still have not seen that from his career. Here's a colt that the Breeders' Futurity last year, I loved him in that race. I thought he was disappointing. And I thought, well, give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe Kent move a little early on him. Coming back in the Breeders' Cup, I thought he was the horse to beat in there. Was disappointing again. And then he barely won the Delta Jackpot. So I always question whether or not he either had a long campaign at the end of the year and that took something from him, or maybe he wasn't quite a top shelf type colt. I think he showed today, when the conditions favor him, or he showed in this race, he is a top shelf type colt. Now coming back in the Derby, can he put 2 together now? Big question for Exaggerator going forward.
All right, well, that leads us in perfectly to the Bluegrass, because we're talking about another colt who has the same question marks. Ken Brody's Cause, can he come in and put 2 races back to back? Looks like he's back in form if you watch this race here.
Yeah, here's a horse that, was sort of on the fast track, and things didn't go to plan. When he ran the Tampa Bay Derby, John, he just didn't handle that quirky surface, but he looked phenomenal in the paddock. I was there for this race in the paddock. He looked great, and he ran tremendous. Now, look at the runner-up in here, My Man Sam, the horse that we liked in the race. He drew the 14 hole. I do think it was a fairly run race. You see your pace setter, Loban, I thought ran very well on the lead, being a fourth in here. I think that showed that towards the end of the day, the track was playing pretty fair. However, I will say this, Brody's Cause got great inside run. I mean, at the quarter pole, the jockey was able to find a hole inside and kind of put him on the crown of the track where it was good all day and finish. He was in a better position than My Man Sam and Cherry Wine, who tried to follow him but got closed off, had to go wide. I mean, My Man Sam, if you look at the final quarter he ran and look at how many, if you look at the Trackist numbers on him, he traveled wider than any horse in the race, and he finished his final quarter faster than any horse in the race. So my takeaway is My Man Sam, Brody's Cause, two very good closers coming out of that race moving towards the Derby. They're both live.
All right, well, let's take a look now and see where Brody's Cause lands on the TCI top 10, and let's discuss that for a minute. I see he's in at number 5.
Yeah.
Joel, it's a little surprising to me. I see More Spirit still in at number 1. I mean, he didn't really look like he was finishing very well. Are you blaming that on the track conditions? Why do you have More Spirit in number 1, Brody's Cause in number 5?
I just think he's the most likely, complete package Derby can. He still never run worse than second. He was trying to come on there. For some reason, Santa Anita never struck me as a horse that would love Santa Anita. He's a big colt. I don't think he runs those tighter turns that well. To me, he's a horse that just shows spurts in a race, still trying to figure it out, but he's trained well for Bob Baffert. He didn't have a good wet track number. They said he didn't handle the muddy track that well. I think, again, going 1.25 miles, I love his profile. I love Bob Baffert at Churchill Downs. Right now, for me, he's going to stay at number 1. We'll see what happens after the Arkansas Derby when we really get to reassess what this field of 20 is going to be like. But to me, he has the best credentials going forward. And you saw there at number 5, Brody's Cause started in the top 5 for us, was disappointed. Now he's back in the top 5. And actually moved My Man Sam down a spot, because my problem with My Man Sam is, and we talked about this, he's a horse that comes from so far out of it. He's going to have to learn to make a run to get in a position in a race like the Kentucky Derby, because it's likely not going to melt down for him up front for him to be able to pass all those horses to win for such an inexperienced type colt. So I'm a little concerned about that, but a big talent there. I like my top 6.
All right, let's talk now about the Arkansas Derby, Joel. It's the last of the 100-point races, as we mentioned. There's some horses in here. They really need to run first or second to make it into the Derby. I mean, this is make or break time. I mean, this is the time where you got to show up or you don't get in.
Well, this is kind of a remake of the Rebel Stakes. This isn't the vintage Arkansas Derby we've kind of been used to seeing with, American Pharoah and some of these superstars in this race. I think it's going to be the same 3 horses that were 1, 2, 3 in the Rebel. The thing I notice is there's a little more speed in here. Windstar is interestingly bringing a horse named Gettysburg in, drawing the 12 hole with Johnny V. Horse with a lot of tactical speed. I would not be surprised at all if he was forwardly placed, occupying Cupid up front to try to legitimize the pace in here, to try to set it up for Creator, their other horse, who may be their best Derby hopeful. So you start looking at the fields and you start looking at the point requirements to get into the Derby. Right now, the Mendoza line's right at about, 32, right?
Yeah.
4 horses tied with 32 points.
Yep.
You need to get there or above. So when you start looking at these horses, I think there's one horse in the race, and it's Dazzling Jim. If he were to run third, I think he could get in.
Yep.
Because what does he have, 20 points
20
right
points
now?
right now, yes.
Yeah, every other horse in here has to at least run second to get in. So you start evaluating that. Horse like Whitmore, he has 24 points, so he could actually run third as well, excuse me. That horse has run, everybody else has to run either first or second to get in. I do think it's going to be more speed with Gettysburg in the race, chasing Cupid in here. I think it sets up for Whitmore. He's a horse that's been waiting to break through at Oaklawn. I think he's going to love the extra 16th of a mile. Personally, I think it's between Creator and Whitmore yet. Can Creator make up the ground in terms of his development to catch a horse like Whitmore, who is in form, knocking on the door, is going to get a legitimate pace to run at here? Those are the 2 colts I'll be watching most.
All right, man, it's going to be interesting. Well, there's one more race to talk about. There's 10 points on the line.
We're talking about the Preakness Prep?
Yeah, I really think at this point it's the Preakness Prep. There's no horses in here that can win the Lexington and get into the Derby. But there is a really good horse in here named Swipe. This horse was very consistent. Joel, I think there's a lot of people who are probably happy that this horse is not going to get in the Derby because he's a serious talent.
They tried to fast track him to the Derby, but he got injured last year and was a runner-up in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. They weren't able to get him back in time. So they've had some, I look at Keith DeSormo's put, a mile work in this, a couple of three-quarter works in this horse. So it's clear to me that he likes Keeneland. He's a closer. If you were to run well in here, you're right. You know, they only get 10 points if they win this race. So none of these horses are getting in the Derby. However, if he were to run well in here, you could view this as a Preakness prep for him, maybe even for a horse like Collected for Bob Baffert. If he ran well in here, you could see him maybe coming back. So it's worth paying attention to because we are Triple Crown Insider.
Right.
We're all about Derby right now, but this could be a Preakness prep.
All right, thank you, Joel.
Yep.
Thank you guys for watching. Make sure you come back next week. We'll talk about the Arkansas Derby, and we'll start forming our Derby field.